This is Writing It, the podcast about academics and writing. I'm Rachel Gordon. Here, we aim to make the process of writing and publishing a bit more transparent and a bit less overwhelming. Through conversations with editors and academics at all stages, from full professors to graduate students, independent scholars, and postdocs, we share stories, lessons, and helpful habits from our writing lives. We're really excited to get to speak with Cate Hodorowicz, editor at UNC Press. Welcome, Cate.
Thanks, Rachel.
Can you tell us what areas you acquire books in?
Sure. I do Western and Borderlands history, religion, and that's religious studies and religious history, food studies, and literary nonfiction. And then I also do books about the South and North Carolina more broadly, usually gardening, art, that kind of thing.
Great categories. You mentioned one, literary nonfiction. I imagine that many of us academics assume that maybe our books could count for that. So how is this literary nonfiction section actually different?
It's also the same thing as what some people call creative nonfiction. So memoirs, essays, and hybrid works, really more for people who have either gone into an MFA or enjoy creative writing or just enjoy really good, true stories. And that's a trade category for us because you have to have a trade designation to go into bookstores. And so we don't do a ton of them, but we do some. And that's also where all my training is. And so anytime I get to work on one of those, it makes me very happy.
So you mentioned those count as trade or crossover. What does that mean for a book or an author if they get to count as trade or crossover?
Sure. So at our press, we've got 3 different categories. We also call them profiles. So if I switch between the two, that's what they are. One profile is academic, and those are monographs and also books that academics write for other people within their fields. The crossover profile, which we also call mid-list, so you might hear me drop into that a little bit, that is for both academics and also some educated general readers who would have a specific interest within the topic. And then trade is for more of your general audience. And you're going to hear me later say that I can't stand that term because there's actually no such thing. There's no book that absolutely everyone on the planet will love and want to read. But those are the general parameters of them. And trade books are the ones that bookstores, even indie bookstores, tend to stock the most because there is a discount that bookstores get, and it's a higher discount than academic or crossover books would get. And bookstores need that discount in order to stay in business, but it also means that publishers do not make as much money per book because we have to give that discount to the bookstores.
I think there are many academic authors who like to think or maybe hope to write a book that counts as crossover or trade. And I'm just wondering how this works with you and UNC Press. If I'm an academic and I write in my book proposal, I think this might be a trade press book. What's your response? What are you checking out to see if that is the case?
First thing is there's 3 things in particular. Is there a really new and compelling argument that relates to the world today? In a rather crass way to put it, but it's very simple. It's the who cares and why now phenomenon. And often if I ask the questions that way, but in a kind, supportive voice, I get a lot more concrete answers. And you really want the answers to those questions to be super concrete and not couched in academic jargon. We want to see if you can actually speak to, let's say, an audience of college sophomores and juniors and reach them with your writing and even, with your presentation style. The other thing is that the writing has to really be accessible and engaging, has to tell a really good story and keep people interested from beginning to end. And then the last part, which is honestly the thing that I've seen authors have the hardest part with, it's having a really robust author platform and being able to show that you already have a network that you can reach out to that will really help promote and publicize your book. So those 3 things are what I'm looking for. And like I said, I get a lot more projects that have the first 2 elements, but people haven't really thought about their author platform, or they think, well, maybe I can build it while I'm writing this book. And that's really hard because if you want to go under advanced contract as a crossover book, I need to already be able to show the rest of the people at the press that you have this platform, that, it's not something that you can build as you work. It really needs to be pretty solid upfront.
So, in terms of the first two, kind of the who cares and why now,
Mhm.
and my writing style and being accessible, that might come across in the book proposal and sample writing.
Yes, absolutely. It should, because that's where you're putting your best foot forward for the editor. And you're also communicating to me that these are the audiences I want to reach. And so my proposal and sample chapters are going to be written in a style that would matter to those people and would get them to listen.
And what kinds of things can people show to show platform?
Oh, it can be a lot of things and it can be different for different people. Social media is always helpful, but we'd say you don't have to do it. Like if you're really, really against it, there are other things now that can really disseminate your work and let people know you're out there. Substack is one. I think people are really finding that a nice new tool, especially since it has video capabilities embedded into it. And so it doesn't have to just be static pictures. You can actually do full interviews online and, put them into your Substack. Also, just really knowing people within your field. That I can't stress that enough. Just network, network, network. Be nice to people, do favors for them, have them in return, so that when you're working with a marketing team at a press, you can give them a very big list of people to reach out to. And those people might be blurbers for you. They might also have contacts at different publishing outlets where you can do op-eds and just people who can really help all the wheels of the publishing and media empires move a little bit more quickly. Most presses have a really good Rolodex, I don't know if we still use that word anymore, but of contacts at different media outlets that they can pitch to. But it works much better if an author already has a pre-existing relationship with someone somewhere. So, for example, if an author already has an editor at LitHub that they know from before, it's much easier to pitch that editor and have that editor say yes if there's a pre-existing relationship. So it's a lot of upfront work and also anyone who's already been writing for other outlets and other public facing media, that really helps too, because that shows us that not only do they have the context, but they have the ability to write those shorter op-ed pieces that can then be shared and shared all over online and drive sales toward the book.
Is that the kind of thing I might write about in my About the Author section of a book proposal?
Yes, you can write it there or you can put it in the marketing section.
Mm.
Either place will work. And I don't think we don't have a preference as long as it's in there somewhere.
I think a lot of academics are confused about what they can say knowledgeably about marketing. You've just given us some idea that I might talk about my connections. What else might academics put in marketing sections?
Oh, you can put academic organizations that you belong to, like the Organization of American Historians. I just got back from that conference. You can say if you're on any particular committees, if you've won any awards, if you've written for specific publications, if you have appeared on podcasts like this one, if you have written something that's gone viral, like really anything that makes you look like a rock star. And I really encourage people to go research authors that you think are doing a great job at the crossover. Look at their websites, look at how they talk about themselves. A lot of them will have a media kit on their websites. See what's in there and all the materials that they've prepared to really present themselves. And that will help authors get a sense of how to present themselves in that proposal when it comes to the author bio and the marketing section.
Speaking of the crossover type of books and authors, some academics I know are wondering, they're considering for a second or third book either trade or the crossover or trade division of an academic press. Do you have advice for academics who are considering this, the pros of, say, going with the academic press that has its trade division?
I would say to them, just do their research on both sides. I think different people are going to want different things out of a trade and a crossover experience. And it will be different at different places, whether it's two houses that are trade, two houses that are university press versus trade. And some university presses do crossover and trade books very similarly, or at like the same level that you would see within a New York trade house, like let's say Norton, for example. Others, not so much. And so don't just talk to editors, but talk to other authors. Find out what their experiences have been. Talk to the editors themselves. Just as many people as you can talk to get the best intelligence possible, so that then you can make decisions about, do I want to stay in university press world? Do I want to go to trade? Or we have a lot of authors who do the same. They might have a project that they have on offer both to us and through an agent to a trade press, and that's not unusual. So again, it'll come down eventually to relationships and also what people are looking for in terms of financial compensation for their books.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we've been hearing recently is that the advances or money has not been great recently for nonfiction, maybe especially for folks who aren't so well known. So that's a little bit less of a plus than it used to. But what you just mentioned, I want to make sure I understand this. You say it might be the case that someone might try both
At the
routes.
same time,
Yeah. And then I guess you're saying they might have that benefit of getting to have conversations and just finding out what feels best for them.
exactly, because at that point you probably narrow down to two or three presses, and if they're all interested, you'll get to talk to not only the editors but the marketing team, and you'll get to see what the vision is at the press for that book. Does that vision actually differ quite a bit from what you have in the proposal? Because that can certainly be the case. How much intervention do they want to do into the idea that you already have? And is that intervention something that you actually want for your work? And then you can weigh all the pros and cons. As much as things sometimes come down to the financial angle, I have also seen them come down to the relationship between editor and author, and which editor really gets what the author wants to do. And that can be a very personal thing. And that also can just be a press perspective as well, because usually the press has talked with the editor about how they want to position a book. And, if it's not about the money, I mean, ideally it's about the ideas really, and the people that you work with. So, that's how people tend to make that last decision among their last two or three. And if there's trade and UPs involved.
I know academics sometimes wonder if the book exhibit hall of their conference is a good time or opportunity to maybe have a conversation. What do you think of that environment for getting to meet an editor for the first time?
I love it, except people get really nervous and they don't need to be. Most of us are extraordinarily forgiving. And the first few conferences I went to as an editor, I felt like the new kid. And I really was like, oh gosh, am I an imposter here? Like definitely had that going on. But what I would really suggest people do is if there's an editor that you really want to talk with, email them anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks before the conference and say, hey, here's me. Here's a little bit about my project. I'd love to just chat with you and talk about what you're doing in this space. Then I'm definitely able to make an appointment with that person and make sure that we actually run into each other, as opposed to like ships in the night, just trying to find each other at the book exhibit if I don't even know that they're there. Most editors have a pretty full dance card at the conferences, and that means they're not always going to be at the exhibit booth itself. So reaching out ahead of time is one of my favorite things for people to do. It also shows that people are interested in me, they're proactive. If I look at the project, I'm like, oh, this is a match made in heaven. Of course, let's meet. It also makes it a little easier for that first introduction. We've already had a little bit of online introduction, and you don't feel quite so much. And this is for the authors, I would assume, like they just feel a lot more relaxed coming up and saying, hi, I emailed you and I'd love to talk. And then off you go, as opposed to, do you have a chance? Do you have 2 seconds to listen to my pitch in the very busy, noisy hall? I certainly will do it. And I've met great people and gotten great projects that way. But I think it's a lot easier for everybody if it's a scheduled appointment rather than the catch as catch can.
About the matches made in heaven kind of book projects, what are those? Is that a case of you not having gotten enough in a certain category that you're sort of looking to kind of publish more in one of your areas, or what kinds of things make you feel that way?
Oh gosh, I could probably talk for an hour just on that question. So I'll try to just do the main one is when something shows up in my inbox or I see a presentation at a conference that first fits my list areas. So let's look at Western history. Let's say. And let's say somebody comes to me and they're like, okay, I want to write about Chinese migrants to San Francisco in the area of the Chinese Exclusion Act. And I'm also looking at how these people kind of like fought back or resisted this particular thing. And then, where did they go? Now that story's been told, but UNC Press is really known for its ethnic and immigration history. I have a Western history list, and I also happen to be the series editor for the Borderlands series at UNC Press. So all of those things together would tell me that this book is absolutely in my wheelhouse and that I have a network of senior scholars who can help with the peer review on this, and that my marketing team already has a really good foothold in this area. And so if I brought this book forward, we would really not have a problem with the marketing and dissemination of this particular book because it hits all of our sweet spots. And that's just for academic, like in general. And I don't mean to say just. Sometimes when we get in these conversations, people think, oh, I'm on my second book, but it's still academic. Like, am I supposed to still be in that space? Should I do the crossover? And my answer is do the book you want to do. Don't try to write for anybody else. And find an editor who understands what you want to do. Also find an editor who is honest with you about their time, the writer's ability, and what the best case scenario is really for the book. That way you don't get disappointed later on down the line. So a book that really fits my list and UNC Press's goals as a whole, that's the first thing. And then the other thing that makes me really happy is if this author's like, oh, I really like to tell stories because of my creative nonfiction background. I love working with people on storytelling. So that's really fun. And I will be honest, an author who's already started looking at some of that more public facing work, an author who has a website, things like that, things where I know this person is going to be able to move a certain number of books based on what they're already coming to the table with. Because that means it's an easy yes for me, it's an easy yes for the press, and the author can just slide in and do what they're already good at, and it doesn't feel like you're pulling teeth to try to get this book to be something that it's not.
About moving books, I'm curious if an author has already written one book, so this is their second or third academic press book, and maybe the others were not at your press, but now they're proposing to you. What are you looking at or looking up about their previous books that's helping you make your decision?
As much as I can find out, because data is important. And the more information I have before I meet with that person, the more I can assess, even early, what I think this profile might be and what the author's interests might be and how to even approach a conversation with them. So I do as much homework as possible. And I also know that it will save me time later because if I do decide to bring this project forward for contract, my marketing team is going to ask me for all of that data on previous sales, what networks they have, all of those things. So if I do it once, it really saves a lot of time.
I know you know that sales for academic books are sometimes a bit lower than other kinds of books, but our listeners are often wondering, it's like they want to know numbers. I'm curious if you're able to say what is sort of a good but realistic, that amount that somebody has sold an academic book.
That's a hard question because different academic disciplines have different numbers of people in their audiences. So, for example, because I'm the religion editor, I also have a series called Islamic Civilizations and Muslim Networks. Some of those books are very specific to specific kinds of Islam, or they're very tied into one specific type of Islam in art and a very specific type of art. So it's a very niche group of people who will be interested in this. So selling X number of books for that book could be amazing. But that book, that number of sales, isn't going to be the expectation I might have, say, for a big Western history that is really kind of tearing down the idea of manifest destiny. That one, there's a lot of people who would be interested in that within the academy, and that's just a different space with more people in the field, especially here in the United States. So we'd have a much higher expectation for that book, even if it was academic. So we really try to gauge expectations for academic books based on their comparable titles, what we have seen in the marketplace in the past, and we make a plan for that. And if that plan works, that book was super successful. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. So I feel like numbers aren't a good measure of how well the book is written or how well the book performed. I think where things get into dicey territory is where, let's just take a crossover book, for example. And let's say, we put out a print run that is well above what even that Western history was, for example. And let's just say something happens. Let's say the president decides to invade another country on the day that book releases.
Mm-hmm.
All of the media that you might have had lined up for that book might be gone.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that happens. Sometimes an author gets sick and can't promote their book. Other times the news cycle is just not favorable for a particular book at a particular time. And you can't know 3 years earlier when you sign that book that that particular event or media cycle is going to be happening. So sometimes performance, is really due to that. Other times publishers make mistakes. And sometimes we just don't read the room right. I mean, every single project that we sign is a risk. And we hope it's going to do what we think it's going to do, but you don't actually know until it does, which is why, publishing such a tough industry. Like, you sign it now, but yeah, in 2 years, is that really fresh idea actually going to be an old idea? You don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned having an honest conversation with your authors. I'm curious, as you're saying, you don't know what's going to be in, say, 2 or 3 years when this book finally comes out, but what kinds of things might you discuss with an author about your plan, or it sounded like you were saying sort of what you feel we can realistically hope this book will be? What might you present to an author or explain to them is realistic?
When we bring a book for contract at the press, I always have to give it a profile right there and say, oh, I'm going to, we should look at this as an academic, a mid-list, or a trade book. And then we have a discussion about that. And it's a discussion by committee. It's not something I get to make. And so sometimes my peers give me feedback. And sometimes it's not the feedback that I necessarily wanted to hear, but it's important because we all do this together. And then I'll go back to the author sometimes and say, hey, okay, here's these additional perspectives that came in, and this they think is a better way to go right now. This happens sometimes when people are interested in doing a crossover book, but the materials that they submitted aren't quite solid enough, or their network isn't quite as expansive as we'd like to think immediately, like, yes, we can do this with the book. So sometimes what I'll have to do is go back to the author and say, look, your ambitions are fantastic. At the same time, we're going to think about this as academic for now. Write as well as you can, do everything you can, and here's all the networking stuff you would need to do to get it to this next level for publication. Because you do have 2 or 3 years to kind of make it better. But we don't lock anything into a profile with a contract, for example. And so I always try to be as realistic with people as possible and say, okay, this is the sure bet. Here's the thing you can shoot for if you want to. And if you decide you don't want to, it's fine, because we already said that this was wonderful over here.
So that committee that's discussing is kind of, you're all trying to figure out, how can this really work best? What's the best way for this book to come out?
Absolutely.
And does that sometimes mean making the story bigger or smaller? What changes have you seen recommended from that?
I mean, it can be the same story, but it's the way it's presented. So the way you pitch it and tell people, oh, this is a book about X. You pitch it one way and it's still the same story. People are like, okay. But you pitch it another way with really engaging language. My director of publicity is fantastic at this. She transforms my pitches all the time. I'm like, wow, this is your job. That's why she's good at her job. And so it could be the same book, but the language you use to describe it and sell it is very different. And that's what I've seen change. And so sometimes I can say to authors, okay, I know this is the story that you're telling and this is the language that you used. what if you thought about these phrases instead? What will that do? And sometimes it works really well because it jogs their thinking and it shows them, oh, I'm here, but I can elevate this to another level. And then they can do that with the manuscript and they can kind of signpost that additional kind of tweaked publicity language and storyline all through the manuscript. And before, it would have kind of been, it would have been fine and serviceable. But if you can elevate it just a little bit more with that signposting and through line with that particular language, your readers are going to enjoy that book a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, that's really the kind of feedback that I feel like most of us academics really want because we've been so stuck in the weeds that we often can't see what's the way to bring it out more. I know that academics sometimes when we're pitching editors, we think this book we might need like another 2 years to finish a manuscript, and I've heard a lot of people wonder, is it too much to say that I need, say, 18 months or 24 months? Is that going to lessen the editor's interest? Maybe just because it's hard to plan that far in advance. Is there an ideal time, do you think, for an author to be approaching you?
I think the 2 to 3 years, from the time you get your contract, I think for us is fine and usual, especially for people who are in traditional tenure track jobs. They have 7 years. And so hopefully they spent the first like three-ish getting to their proposal and figuring out what they're going to do. And then like the last three or so before tenure, they're going to have to get this book done. All of that said, there are so many people who are contingent faculty and they don't have the security of a tenure track job. And so they're cobbling together so many classes just to be able to pay their rent. So if they need more time, of course they need more time. And so it's an individual decision with each author. We really talk about what do you need, what will help you stay accountable. And the other part of the conversation is if you can't make a deadline, just let me know and we will work on it. I'm pretty flexible with that. We all understand that life happens. And a good academic book is usually going to be a good academic book. I mean, someone has spent all those years writing that dissertation and then switching that book from dissertation into a book. I'm more than happy to give those people as much time as they need without it becoming, obviously, 10, 12 years down the line.
When someone is sending you a cover letter, I wonder what works for you in terms of how much they're trying to sell the book. Some of us are told at certain stages it's helpful to be thinking about the jacket cover of a book as you're thinking of what it would mean to draw in a reader, but that can be very selling kind of language. So what do you like to see in your cover letters? And do you like to see that ability of the author to think about how they would try to sell this?
It's helpful to see, especially with the crossover books or trade books, because it also shows me how this person already knows how to talk about their book to a broader audience of people who might be academics, but more likely aren't. So that is really helpful. At the same time, if you're an academic author and you're really struggling with the selling language, I always say, well, tell it to me like I was one of your students, like a sophomore, junior in college, who's interested and engaged. Tell me what your argument is and why it matters. And then, kind of just like a friendly conversational voice that avoids the jargon, but you don't have to elevate it to that selling point where the world's going to end if you don't read my book. If it's not natural to you, you shouldn't do it. Because I've definitely seen people oversell and it falls even more flat than if I had gotten a proposal that has a lot of academic language in it.
Yeah. The UNC Press website helpfully does include a lot of information about what authors will want to include in their book proposal. And one of those is maybe answering the question how you came to write this book at this point in your career. That was interesting to me. Is that the kind of information you've seen the press actually use in marketing the book?
Yes, it can. So if somebody has, for example, a personal connection to the story that they're writing, which is the case for many of the historians and also the religious studies people who I work with, that can sometimes be used to help spin an op-ed that you would publish when the book is being released. Sometimes it can help us with jacket copy. Sometimes I encourage people to put themselves in their introductions or their epilogues, or if there's like a family connection, because introductions and conclusions, you can do a lot of really interesting stuff there. And that's really where you grab people. And any kind of personal connection that a reader sees between the author and the subject, it really creates this. It's a personal connection. You're like, oh, you're letting me into your life. This is also part of why this matters. This is a story that affects real people. Your family dynamic might have been one of them, or this comes out of this really cool family story. I know in the past for academics that was super taboo, but it's really starting to become much more accepted. And I do think audiences really appreciate it. And I know with the marketing angle, having a personal connection can help. But one that's forced, again, is not worth it. So I wouldn't make one up and I wouldn't air dirty laundry if you don't want to air dirty laundry.
You mentioned op-eds. I know this is something many of my academic colleagues try to do around the publication of a book. Is that something that you or marketing or anyone at UNC Press is able to help authors with?
To a point, yes. We can absolutely help authors tweak pitch, especially if there's something interesting going on in the news and an author writes in and says to our publicist, hey, my book that just came out is totally related to this big thing blowing up in the news. Here's a quick pitch. Like, what do you think? And then the publicist can turn, if they have time, because it's a busy day, if they really feel like it's something that could work, they'll massage it a little bit and say, okay, you go pitch out to your people. Here are the people I'm going to try. And then it goes out and you cross your fingers and you hope that one of them sticks.
Yeah, that's great. Another thing that UNC Press asks for is about projected audience. I know many presses want to hear about this. I think early in our conversation, you mentioned the general reader is maybe not the greatest thing to mention. We've heard that from other editors. I think my academic colleagues love to mention it because we imagine, oh, well, that's really opening up readership. But what's your preference? What would you rather a writer be thinking about?
I would rather, well, first I want them to be really honest in their proposal about what audience they really think this writing is going to reach. And if they're not sure, definitely get feedback on that before you submit the proposal. General audience, like I said before, it's so big that it's not definable. But if you said, this is, I'm going to use an example of a real book because this is easier. This is for readers who are interested in Texas, especially readers who live around the Dallas-Fort Worth area, who are also interested in issues of environment and conservation. Boom. Like, that's still a big population, like Dallas-Fort Worth, and anybody interested in the environment, like that's a lot more specific than general readers. Because this particular book is about the Trinity River, which is the longest river in Texas. And I'm interested because I'm an editor and I work in Western history. But, my college senior who is graduating with a biology degree, she'd be like, okay, that's good for some people, but it's not me. But she's still a general reader. So thinking really specifically about the people who would pick this book up and love it is what you're looking for.
That's helpful. Yeah, the specificity sounds like it makes it believable too.
Absolutely. Think about geography with religion, think about denominations. My gosh, it's really wide open. And a lot of UNC Press books too, we cross list areas very often. So I might have a Western history that's also an environmental history, and that also falls into Latino studies and women and gender studies. That's 4 different conferences right there, potentially 5. And so when you think about that, like, oh, what are all of the areas I'm writing about? You can be like, oh, readers of environmental history who are interested in women's studies, more about the West, say which states. This time we'll go with Montana. And then some of them happen to be migrants, let's say, who are here on a work visa, right? And so people who are maybe interested in social justice surrounding that population. So just think about each of I have my hand up here. This is why podcasts are hard. Think if you've got 5 different things that you're really talking about and engaging in your book, who are the people who would be interested in each of those fingers? And so each of them is a separate audience, but then they're also then together a collective audience.
I also wanted to ask you about length. I so used to hearing people saying they were in the kind of 90 to maybe 110, 120,000 words that always sort of assumed that someone who said like 70,000, that this would be way too little or that a editor might feel sort of nervous. Is the acceptable range?
Lower is fine. We have been known to do shorter books, and if they're a little bit shorter, we can make them smaller trim size. So instead of being 6 by 9, you might put them into a 5.5 by 8.5. Longer is the harder piece. If it's over 100,000 words, it is really hard to price a book affordably. And so it's not as much about, are the readers actually going to stay through this? It's, how do we offer this in the marketplace without charging $45 for a paperback? And so the more economical somebody can be with words, the more likely they will get a price point on their book that makes them happy.
Yeah. And then I also wanted to ask you about series, since you do edit a few series. Is that sort of an easier way into a press publication? And I imagine that some authors would like to just say, I would be happy to be published in this series, but I'm also happy to just be published by you when UNC Press. Do people do that kind of thing too?
Oh, sure. I have people all the time who ask, do I have, if I'm publishing a Borderlands history with you, does it have to go in the series or can it be outside? And the answer is it can be whatever the author wants. Series are really there to help an author build a network, especially first generation scholars can be really, really useful because they don't have perhaps as strong a network in the academy as someone who's, mom and dad were both professors. It helps a person come into a series within their discipline and find kind of a home network with those series editors and all the other authors that have been published in that. And it's immediately kind of a welcoming place for these people to land at conferences and conversations, you name it. It's much easier feeling like you're part of a really accepted group than it is just like standing out over here and going, okay, I have a book. Like, now what do I do? The series editors can provide a lot of guidance, as can the other authors in a series. So that's what I see as a really big value for the authors. For the press, it's great because we get to collect books around a certain theme, and then the series and the press then becomes known for that particular theme. And it just drives even better and better scholarship in that area toward us. So again, it's a marketing piece for us, really. And at the same time, if people are like, no, for this particular book, I actually just want it to just be on its own, that's fine too. Yes, editors have a certain number of slots in series, and they definitely, like, I have a lot of list areas, so I have to balance out what I acquire where. But if an author says to me, I'd prefer to be or not be in a series, it doesn't affect whether or not I want that book.
Great. A question we've had from listeners is agent related. Sometimes academics decide to go the agent route with the thought that maybe I'll end up trade, maybe in a crossover division of an academic press. From your perspective, if someone ends up at UNC Press having used an agent, I'm assuming maybe they're getting a little more money, or what do you see as the advantage when that ends up happening?
Oh, I think it depends on the agent. Some agents are really involved and they're a fantastic resource for an author through their entire career. Other agents are really more, they see their job much more as, I'm going to open the door to the press for you. And then after that, the publishing house takes over. From the press's perspective, there might be a little bit more money in the offer, but what ends up happening is the agent takes 15%. And so what the author actually receives ends up being what it would have been without the agent, usually. So as far as the financial piece of it, that's it. I've worked with agents, they're fantastic. I've worked on mid-list and trade without agents, and it works. It really just depends, what an individual author wants for their career and what they want out of the agent.
Hmm. So it sounds like if you're going to end up at a university press, maybe even in their trade or crossover, do you think you can often get there even without the agent?
Yeah, if it's a good book,
Mhm.
you can get there with or without the agent, for sure.
You mentioned that you have a background in creative writing. I'm just curious how this has entered into your work with academic authors.
I use it every day and I love it. I'm the strange person who has 2 MFAs. I did one in poetry and one in creative nonfiction. And I use the skills from both of those every day, especially economy of language. That's what poetry is about. It's about best words, best order. So I feel like that it's baked in all the time. And then the creative nonfiction training I have was really heavy on book structure and choosing representative characters. So when I work with authors and they're trying to figure out, okay, how do I tell this story and how do I make it work with the history? I'm able to talk to them about story arcs and story shapes. And we sketch those out on paper. So how do you get all these things to align? And so I use that again every day. Anytime I talk to somebody about book structure, a lot of books, people will be like, I don't know how to open these chapters. And so we'll then talk about like, what's the best vignette to open your chapter? And why is this the best one? And what other kind of evidence do you have to make this scene potentially richer? Can you find out what the weather was like on that day? Or what flowers were in bloom in this area of the country at that particular time? So all of the skills all the time. It was an expensive way to get into publishing. I don't know. Don't know that it's the best choice, but I've been very grateful for all the instruction from both programs.
Maybe based on that training, you can answer one question we often ask guests is if there's writing habits or practices that work, and this might be for you or the authors you work with. Any advice or suggestions?
I mean, it depends what part of your book you're working on. I guess one example that comes to mind is when I just gave an author, I've worked on her introduction with her through a couple drafts. And it's really an incredible introduction. And then I reread the last paragraph and I went, you know what? It was serviceable before, but it is not serviceable now. And so the advice I gave her was try writing longhand. Don't look at this. Just give yourself 20 minutes to write. What do you want to say to somebody at the end of this conclusion? Not these are the central questions, or I want you to think about X, but like really like, what do you want to say to them? That's the most important thing that you could say. And so I said, just free write, because sometimes when you're typing, you get too hung up on the words that are already there. It's too easy to backspace and you don't give your mind enough time to spiral out. So free writing for me is one of the big ones. And also drawing pictures of structure and making maps for yourself. You can make one for chapter, you can make one for a paragraph, like whatever bugaboo you're having. Drawing yourself a map tends to help things fall into place a little easier.
That's great advice. Thanks so much, Cate. This has been really fun and interesting.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. This was great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Writing It, the podcast about academics and writing, sponsored by the Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Florida. Visit our podcast description to find out how to contact us and send us your questions about academic writing and publishing. Follow us on social media at Writing It Pod and subscribe to us so you never miss an episode.